Hi everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Broadcast. I hope you are all doing well. Today, I want to make the case that Family Guy, the adult animated sitcom that debuted in 1999, enjoyed a stretch many fans regard as its golden age, before later seasons showed a decline in comedic sharpness and cultural weight. By looking at its early appeal, its revival, the years of peak fan reception, the shifts in its humor and character focus, and how the later seasons stack up against the classic era, we can understand why fans and critics single out a particular period as the show's high point and what actually changed. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free, and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we have managed to build. Anyway, that is enough of that. Let's begin, starting with the show's origins and early appeal. When Family Guy premiered on January 31st, 1999, right after Super Bowl 33, it presented audiences with something that felt fresh and daring within the landscape of animated television. The show came from Seth MacFarlane, a young animator who had pitched the concept to Fox based on his thesis film at the Rhode Island School of Design. The debut episode, Death Has a Shadow, introduced the Griffin family: Peter the bumbling father, Lois the patient wife, Meg the unpopular daughter, Chris the slow-witted son, Stewie the diabolical baby, and Brian the talking dog. This family would eventually become iconic in the history of animation, but in 1999 they were newcomers trying to carve out a place in a television world still ruled by The Simpsons. The early episodes, spanning what would become the first 3 seasons, established a comedic voice that set the show apart from its predecessors and competitors. Where The Simpsons satirized American family life through grounded stories, and King of the Hill offered sincere, character-driven comedy, Family Guy leaned into absurdist humor and boundary-pushing jokes that many critics initially found shocking or offensive. The show was unafraid to take on controversial topics, joke about sensitive subjects, and generally press against the limits of what network television would permit in an animated comedy. One of the most distinctive features Family Guy introduced in these early seasons was the cutaway gag, a storytelling device that would become the show's signature. These cutaways interrupt the main narrative to show flashbacks, fantasies, or tangential jokes that frequently have nothing to do with the plot. An early example appears in Death Has a Shadow, when Peter compares a situation to something else, and the show literally cuts away to depict that comparison. The technique let Family Guy cram more jokes into each episode than a traditional narrative structure would allow, creating a joke-per-minute density that appealed to audiences hungry for constant comedic stimulation. In these early seasons, the cutaway gags often felt fresh and unexpected because the format was new and the writers were still discovering what they could do with it. A cutaway might drop viewers into ancient Rome, a 1970s sitcom, a war zone, or any other setting the writers could dream up. The sheer randomness created a sense of unpredictability where viewers never quite knew what was coming next, and that unpredictability became part of the show's appeal, building anticipation as audiences wondered what absurd tangent the show would spin off into. Beyond the cutaways, the early seasons set up character dynamics that fans found compelling and memorable. Peter Griffin emerged as a well-meaning but incompetent father whose childish behavior and poor judgment drove many storylines. Lois served as the voice of reason, trying to manage her chaotic family, though the show also exposed her own flaws and rebellious past. Meg became the family punching bag, a running joke that would only intensify in later seasons. Chris was established as sweet but dim. Stewie, an evil genius baby plotting world domination, provided a genuinely unique comedic element. Brian, the dog, served as Peter's best friend and the show's intellectual voice, frequently commenting on the absurdity around him. The relationship between Peter and Brian anchored many early episodes. Their dynamic, with the educated dog playing straight man to Peter's buffoonery, created openings for both physical comedy and verbal wit. Episodes like Brian, Portrait of a Dog from Season 1 explored Brian's depth, showing him at obedience school and wrestling with his identity as both a dog and an intellectual. That blend of an absurdist premise with genuine character exploration gave early Family Guy a balance between the silly and the substantive. The early episodes also introduced recurring characters and locations that would become staples. The Drunken Clam, the bar where Peter and his friends gather, was established as a regular setting. Quahog, the fictional Rhode Island town where the show takes place, was developed with its own geography and community of recurring faces. Glenn Quagmire, the sex-obsessed neighbor, arrived with his signature catchphrase. Joe Swanson, the paraplegic police officer, joined the main cast as one of Peter's friends. Cleveland Brown, the calm and mild-mannered neighbor, rounded out the friend group. These supporting characters enriched the show's world and opened up additional comedic possibilities. Season 1, which ran only 7 episodes because of its mid-season start, introduced the core elements but was still finding its voice. The animation was noticeably rougher than in later seasons, with simpler character designs and less fluid movement. The voice acting, while recognizable, had not yet settled into the precise performances that would define the characters over the long term, and the writing showed promise, but was still developing the show's distinctive rhythm and style. Watched today, these early episodes feel somewhat different from what Family Guy would become, representing a formative period in which the show was still working out its identity. Season 2, airing from September 1999 to August 2000, showed a real jump in the show's confidence and execution. With a full season order, the writers had more room to develop storylines and experiment with different kinds of episodes. Da Boom, the Season 2 premiere, had the family surviving Y2K and the apocalypse, demonstrating a willingness to embrace high-concept premises. Peter, Caviar Eater, took the family to Lois's wealthy relatives and played with class dynamics, while Let's Go to the Hop tackled drug use through an absurdist storyline about toad licking. These episodes showcased the range of comedy the show could attempt, and the writing displayed sharper timing and more assured joke construction than Season 1. The cutaways felt better integrated into the episode's rhythm, rather than like interruptions. The character voices grew more distinct, and the show developed running gags that recurred across episodes, building callbacks and internal continuity that rewarded regular viewers and deepened audience investment. Season 3, airing from 2001 to 2002, kept refining the show's voice and expanding its ambitions. Episodes like Stuck Together, Torn Apart, explored Peter and Lois's marriage with more emotional depth than the show had previously attempted. From Method to Madness featured Stewie bonding with his alcoholic babysitter, proving that even absurd characters could have touching moments. The season showed that Family Guy could balance its crude humor with occasional emotional resonance. Yet Season 3 would end in cancellation. Despite building a devoted fan base and generating significant cultural buzz, the show's ratings were inconsistent, and the network decided to pull the plug. Family Guy viewer. Male Number 1, the season finale, aired in May 2002 and appeared to be the series' final episode. The cancellation seemed to vindicate the critics who had dismissed the show as a Simpsons ripoff or as crude shock comedy without substance. For the fans who had connected with its humor and characters, it was a real disappointment. Critical reception during these early seasons was decidedly mixed. Many professional television critics found Family Guy derivative, offensive, or lacking the heart and social commentary of The Simpsons, and reviews often dwelled on what the show was not rather than what it was trying to be. Audience reception, however, told a different story. Young adult viewers, particularly men aged 18 to 34, responded enthusiastically to the show's irreverence and its willingness to offend. College students quoted the show, traded favorite moments, and argued over which episodes were funniest. Online fan communities began forming around Family Guy during these early seasons, creating spaces where fans could discuss episodes, share quotes, and connect with others who appreciated the show's specific brand of humor. These early communities on message boards and forums helped sustain interest even after cancellation. Fans traded episodes, made fan art, and kept the show's cultural presence alive during the hiatus. The appeal of early Family Guy for its core audience came from several directions. The show felt transgressive in a way that drew viewers who enjoyed comedy that pushed limits. The rapid-fire joke style meant that even when a joke missed, another arrived almost instantly. The pop culture references and cutaways created a viewing experience that rewarded cultural knowledge and quick thinking, and the characters, however crude or mean-spirited, had distinctive voices and relationships that viewers found entertaining. In hindsight, many fans who found Family Guy during these original 3 seasons remember them as the show's most vital period. Episodes from this era are frequently cited in discussions of favorite moments, and quotes and scenes from these seasons became part of internet culture, shared widely even before YouTube made such sharing easy. The show felt dangerous and unpredictable in ways that later seasons, with their established formulas and expectations, would never quite recapture. The animation style of these early seasons has a distinctive look that differs from later Family Guy. The colors are slightly less saturated, the character models less refined, and the overall aesthetic feels raw and unpolished. For some fans, that rougher visual style actually adds to the appeal, matching the show's rougher-edged humor. The animation would grow noticeably more polished and computer-assisted in later seasons, producing a cleaner but arguably less distinctive look. The voice acting in the early seasons also has qualities that set it apart. McFarlane voices Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, and his performances back then sound slightly different from what they would become. Peter's voice had not yet deepened to its standard tone. Stewie's accent and vocal patterns were still being refined, and Brian sounded a touch less jaded. Those subtle differences give the early seasons a distinct feel. The music and sound design contributed to the show's identity as well. The theme song, composed by Walter Murphy, established an upbeat, jazzy tone, while the incidental music often referenced cinematic scores or popular songs, adding layers of humor through musical choices. The sound effects were sometimes exaggerated for comic effect, heightening the cartoon reality, and together these audio elements combined with the visual humor to shape the show's overall sensory experience. The early seasons also benefit from what might be called creative hunger. The writers and creators were working to establish the show and prove its worth, producing an energy and ambition that comes through in the episodes. There was a sense that the show had something to prove, that it needed to justify its existence and win audiences over, and that creative urgency often yields some of a program's best work before it becomes comfortable and established. The themes and subject matter of these early seasons, controversial as they often were, reflected genuine satirical intent in many cases. Episodes commented on American culture, family dynamics, television itself, and various social issues. The show was rarely subtle, but it made a real attempt to use comedy to point out absurdities and hypocrisies, and that satirical edge gave it a sense of purpose beyond simply making people laugh. The legacy of these first 3 seasons goes beyond merely being the beginning of a long-running series. They established a template that many other animated comedies would either borrow from or react against. The rapid-fire joke style, the willingness to offend, the cutaway structure, and the focus on absurdist humor over emotional storytelling all became elements that other shows would adopt or deliberately reject. And Family Guy's influence on adult animation in the 2000s and beyond is undeniable, stemming largely from what these early seasons established. For fans who lived through the original run and cancellation, these seasons capture a specific moment in television history. They remember when the show was new and surprising, when every episode might be the last, when its very survival was uncertain. That sense of precariousness and novelty colors how the seasons are remembered and contributes to their status, in retrospect, as a possible golden age. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you are enjoying this breakdown. This early success and devoted fan base would set the stage for something almost unheard of in television history, as Family Guy returned from cancellation in a way few shows ever have. That return, spanning seasons 4 and 5, stands as one of the most remarkable turnarounds in television history, a demonstration of the power that syndication, DVD sales, and passionate fan bases held in the early 2000s media landscape. After the cancellation in 2002, something unexpected began to happen. Cartoon Network's Adult Swim block started airing Family Guy reruns in 2003, introducing the show to new audiences and letting existing fans revisit episodes. The ratings for those reruns were exceptional, outperforming much of Adult Swim's original programming and proving there was a substantial appetite for the show. At the same time, the Family Guy DVD releases were selling in numbers that stunned the entertainment industry. The Season 1 DVD, released in April 2003, sold remarkably well despite containing only 7 episodes, and the Season 2 and 3 releases continued the trend. These figures sent Fox a clear message that there was money to be made from Family Guy even without new episodes. The combination of strong syndication ratings and impressive DVD sales built a business case for reviving the show that network executives found hard to ignore. In 2004, Fox announced that Family Guy would return with new episodes, making it one of the few canceled shows revived on the strength of fan demand and post-cancellation success. The revival validated the fans who had kept the show alive through their viewing and their purchases, and it also established a new model for how canceled shows might find second lives if they built strong enough fan bases and performed well in ancillary markets. The announcement generated significant media coverage and excitement among fans who had mourned the cancellation. Season 4 premiered on May 1, 2005, with North by North Quahog, an episode that directly acknowledged the show's cancellation and return, joking about the hiatus and how time had passed. That meta-awareness of its own history became a hallmark of the revival period, with Family Guy frequently referencing its cancellation, revival, and the television industry more broadly. The premiere drew strong ratings, vindicating Fox's decision. The creative energy in Season 4 felt renewed and eager, with the writers apparently keen to prove that the revival was justified and that the show still had fresh comedy to offer. Episodes from this season are frequently cited on best-of lists and remain fan favorites decades later. PTV, which aired in November 2005, became one of the most talked-about episodes for its satire of FCC censorship, using elaborate musical numbers to parody television standards and practices, and demonstrating the show's ability to critique the media through comedy. Petarded showed Peter declaring aspects of his life through absurdist premises, and the Cleveland Loretta quagmire introduced a dramatic development in the supporting characters' lives, proving that Family Guy could still craft storylines with consequences and continuity even within its largely episodic structure. Season 4 also laid groundwork for Blue Harvest, the first of what would become multiple Star Wars parody specials. Although Blue Harvest would technically air as part of Season 6, the willingness to devote entire episodes to extended parodies of beloved franchises reflected the show's growing confidence and ambition, and these specials would become events that pulled in viewers who might not otherwise tune in. The animation in Season 4 showed noticeable improvement over the pre-cancellation seasons. The years off had seen advances in digital animation, and Family Guy took advantage, with more refined character models, more fluid movement, and enhanced visual polish. Some fans would later argue this increased polish came at the cost of the early season's charm, but it allowed for more complex visual gags and set pieces. Season 5, airing from 2006 to 2007, kept the revival's momentum going with another full slate of episodes. Stewie Loves Lois explored the complicated bond between Stewie and his mother, showing character depth beneath the crude exterior. Saving Private Brian sent Brian to Iraq in a war satire that was controversial and topical. Mother Tucker had Peter's mother dating Tom Tucker, mixing family drama with the show's established cast of Quahog residents. The season demonstrated real range across different kinds of storytelling. One of its most significant episodes was Road to Rupert, which launched what became the Road to series of episodes featuring Stewie and Brian on adventures together. These episodes became a beloved subset of the show's output, typically pairing the two most articulate characters in elaborate situations with higher production values than standard installments. Road to Rupert proved that the Stewie and Brian pairing could carry entire episodes, and that their dynamic offered a different flavor of comedy than the family-focused stories. Ratings during seasons 4 and 5 were strong, often exceeding Fox's expectations and competing well within the Sunday night animation block. Family Guy's return helped anchor Fox's Sunday dominance alongside The Simpsons and what would become American Dad. The revival's success also led to the creation of The Cleveland Show, a spin-off that premiered in 2009 as the Family Guy universe expanded and demonstrated its commercial value to Fox. The show's cultural impact during this period was significant, with characters, quotes, and scenarios entering the broader conversation. The phrase, "Oh my God, who the hell cares?" from Season 4 became a meme, and the "Bird is the Word" song from Season 5's I Dream of Jesus became an internet phenomenon. Stewie's various quotes and Brian's pretentious intellectualism became shorthand in online discourse. Family Guy was not just a successful show, but a cultural force generating content that spread far beyond its viewership. DVD sales stayed robust during this stretch, with Season 4 and Season 5 both selling well. The show also benefited from the rising influence of YouTube and online video sharing, which let memorable clips spread virally. While this unauthorized sharing cut into potential revenue, it also expanded the show's reach and introduced new viewers to episodes they might never have seen, and the cutaway structure made Family Guy especially suited to clip culture, since individual gags could stand alone as shareable content. Fan communities kept growing during the revival, with forums, fan sites, and eventually social media pages dedicated to discussing episodes and debating aspects of the show. That sense of community helped sustain enthusiasm between episodes and reinforce the show's cultural presence. The voice acting in Seasons 4 and 5 showed performers fully settled into their roles. MacFarlane's work as Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire had reached its definitive form, and the supporting cast, including Alex Borstein as Lois, Seth Green as Chris, and Mila Kunis as Meg, after she replaced Lacey Chabert, all delivered confident performances. The chemistry among the cast was evident in the natural-sounding dialogue and comic timing. The writing staff during this period included several people who would go on to be significant figures in television comedy, many of them later creating their own shows or working on other major comedies. The writer's room was generating ideas at a rapid pace to feed the show's need for constant jokes and cutaways, in an environment reportedly energetic and competitive as writers tried to top one another's pitches. The show's appetite for controversy continued through the revival, with episodes tackling subjects that drew complaints from advocacy groups, parental organizations, and media watchdogs. That controversy, however, often translated into publicity and curiosity, with outrage-generating episodes frequently seeing ratings spikes as viewers tuned in to see what the fuss was about. Family Guy seemed to grasp that being talked about, even negatively, beat being ignored in a crowded television landscape. Season 5 also saw more ambitious episode structures and longer-form storytelling within individual episodes. While the show stayed primarily episodic, certain installments experimented with more complex narratives or extended set pieces that went beyond the standard cutaway structure, signaling that the show did not want to simply repeat a winning formula, but to keep evolving. The relationship between Family Guy and The Simpsons during this period was complicated. The Simpsons had famously needled Family Guy in a 2002 episode, suggesting it was a crude imitation, and after the revival, Family Guy occasionally returned fire, fueling a perceived rivalry that media coverage played up. Whether or not the rivalry was genuinely antagonistic, it created narrative tension that interested viewers and outlets. The success of seasons 4 and 5 established that Family Guy was not just back, but thriving, exceeding even optimistic predictions. It drew strong ratings, sold merchandise, generated cultural moments, and cemented itself as a cornerstone of Fox's animation lineup, and its financial success brought stability and assurance of renewal that reduced the precariousness of the original run. Looking back, many fans and critics count seasons 4 and 5 as part of Family Guy's peak. The episodes are well remembered, frequently rewatched, and often held up as examples of the show at its best. The renewed creative energy born of cancellation and revival, the writers' eagerness to prove the show's worth, and the absence of the creative fatigue that comes from hundreds of episodes combined to produce a run many viewers found consistently funny. The Fat Guy Strangler brought back Lois's brother Patrick in a storyline with real stakes and suspense, and Brian the Bachelor parodied reality television, showing the show's continued engagement with pop culture. Each episode seemed to offer something distinct while maintaining the overall Family Guy sensibility. Take a moment to subscribe if this breakdown is proving worthwhile. This period is often folded into the Golden Age, right before quality perceptions would begin to shift, as the show entered what many fans consider its true creative peak. When fans debate Family Guy's best years, seasons 5 through 7 consistently top the ranking lists, marking what many regard as the absolute high point of the show's creative output and cultural relevance. Spanning 2006 to 2009, this period caught Family Guy at its most confident, most ambitious, and most culturally influential. The mixture of post-revival creative energy, established character dynamics, improved production values, and a writing staff that had found the perfect balance between absurdist humor and occasional emotional depth produced a run of episodes that fans still revisit and celebrate years later. Season 5, which began airing in September 2006, built directly on Season 4's successful revival. The opener, Stewie Loves Lois, had Stewie become genuinely attached to his mother after a near-death experience, showing that the show could explore character relationships meaningfully even within its absurdist framework. The episode balanced real emotion with the show's characteristic humor, establishing a template several future episodes would follow, and this ability to deliver occasional emotional moments without abandoning the comedic identity became one of the peak period's hallmarks. Mother Tucker had Peter's mother dating news anchor Tom Tucker, creating family drama for Peter to navigate and demonstrating how the show could reconfigure its established quahog cast into new storylines. The supporting characters, introduced in earlier seasons, were now developed enough to carry significant portions of episodes, enriching the world and providing fresh comedy beyond the core family. The Season 5 episode Barely Legal became controversial and memorable for having Meg develop an obsessive crush on Brian after he takes her to prom. The episode pushed boundaries around age-inappropriate content and mined uncomfortable comedy from Meg's pursuit of the family dog. Controversial as it was, it demonstrated the show's willingness to explore taboo subjects through its absurdist lens and became one of the more talked-about installments of the season. Road to Rupert launched the Road to series, which would become a fan-favorite subset of episodes, typically featuring Stewie and Brian traveling together in elaborate adventure scenarios with bigger animation budgets and more cinematic storytelling. The format let the show experiment with different animation styles, musical numbers, and extended storylines beyond the usual cutaway-heavy structure, with Road to Rupert setting the template as the pair travels to Aspen to retrieve Stewie's teddy bear. The courtship of Stewie's father focused on Peter and Stewie bonding, exploring a relationship between two characters who usually had minimal interaction, and proving that even underemphasized pairings could generate interesting comedy, a flexibility that kept the show feeling fresh rather than repetitive. Whistle. While Your Wife Works had Peter getting Lois hired at the brewery, generating workplace comedy and marital conflict, and showing how the show could take familiar sitcom premises and execute them with its particular sensibility. Season 6, airing from 2007 to 2008, continued the creative peak with episodes that remain highly regarded. Blue Harvest, the premiere, was the show's first full-length Star Wars parody, retelling the original 1977 film with Family Guy characters in the Star Wars roles. It showed incredible attention to detail in recreating scenes, shots, and dialogue while adding the show's comedic sensibility. Ambitious in scope and demanding significant production resources, it proved Family Guy could execute high-concept episodes that felt like events rather than regular installments, and its success led to a standalone DVD release that further demonstrated the show's commercial reach. The special attracted viewers who might not otherwise watch, and that ability to draw casual viewers alongside the core fan base expanded the show's audience during this period. Moving Out featured Brian. Moving out after Peter accidentally kills his mother, dealing with grief and family bonds while keeping its comedic approach and referencing the 1971 TV movie Brian's Song in ways that rewarded viewers with broad cultural knowledge. Lois Kills Stewie served as the shocking conclusion to a two-part story in which Stewie appears to successfully kill Lois and take over the world, featuring elaborate action, dark humor, and genuine suspense before revealing the whole scenario was a simulation Stewie was running. The twist and the ambitious scope showed the show's willingness to play with audience expectations and invest in larger storytelling experiments. Back to the Pilot took Brian and Stewie back in time to the show's first episode, letting Family Guy reference its own history and make meta-commentary on how it had evolved, with the time travel premise generating jokes about the earlier animation quality and changed character dynamics. This self-referential humor delighted longtime fans while remaining accessible to newcomers. The former life of Brian revealed that Brian had a son, Dylan, from a previous relationship, showing that the show could still introduce new character relationships and expand its mythology several seasons in. Season 7, running from 2008 to 2009, maintained the quality and ambition of the previous seasons, while showing the first subtle shifts that would grow more pronounced later. Love Blactually featured Brian dating a black woman and navigating the dynamics of an interracial relationship, tackling racial themes through comedy in ways that drew both praise and criticism. Ocean's 3.5 parodied the Ocean's 11 heist franchise, showing the show's continued ability to execute extended homages while playing with genre conventions. I Dream of Jesus had Peter finding a record of Surfin' Bird and becoming obsessed with the song, creating a massive internet phenomenon as clips of the "Bird is the Word" sequence spread virally, demonstrating how Family Guy could still create cultural moments that reached well beyond the broadcast. Road to Germany, the second road to entry, sent Stewie and Brian accidentally into Nazi Germany in 1939, blending historical elements with comedy and higher production values that reflected the resources Fox was willing to invest in these special episodes. Not All Dogs Go to Heaven had Brian publicly declaring his atheism and facing backlash from religious Quahog residents, generating significant controversy and becoming one of the most complained about episodes in viewer feedback, proof that the show could still provoke genuine public response. Three Kings presented 3 Stephen King parodies, Stand By Me, Misery, and The Shawshank Redemption, using an anthology format that allowed multiple extended parodies in a single episode and appealed to King fans while functioning as comedy for everyone else. Across seasons 5 through 7, fan reception stayed consistently enthusiastic and engaged. Online communities actively discussed episodes, created content, shared favorite moments, and debated rankings, and the show's cultural presence was significant, with references, quotes, and clips circulating widely across the internet. Family Guy had become part of the cultural conversation in ways that extended beyond raw viewership. Ratings remained strong, consistently winning the Sunday night slot among desired demographics and generating advertising revenue that justified continued investment, which in turn gave the show job security and the resources to attempt ambitious episodes and maintain high production values. DVD and merchandise sales stayed robust, with each season's release selling well and Family Guy products readily available, creating multiple revenue streams that made the show valuable to Fox as a multimedia property rather than just a television program. The voice cast delivered some of their most memorable performances during this stretch. MacFarlane's work as Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire showed complete mastery, capable of both comedic and occasional dramatic moments, while Borstein, Green, and Kunis grounded the more absurdist elements in recognizable character work. The animation during seasons 5 through 7 represented the show at its visual peak, balancing improved digital techniques with the character designs and style that defined Family Guy, smooth and polished enough for complex gags and action sequences, yet still continuous with the earlier aesthetic. Later seasons would show even more technical polish that some fans felt strayed too far from the original visual character. The Writer's Room, again featuring people who would go on to major television careers, generated content at a rapid clip to feed the demand for constant jokes, cutaways, and references in a collaborative and competitive environment that produced the show's densely packed comedy. The musical elements were particularly strong, with elaborate numbers in episodes like PTV and the various Road to Specials, as composer Walter Murphy and his team created original songs that worked both as comedy and as genuinely entertaining performances. The guest voice actors during this period included numerous celebrities who recognized the show's cultural cash, and their willingness to appear signaled Family Guy's status as a significant cultural property. Looking at fan rankings and discussions, seasons 5 through 7 consistently sit at or near the top of favorite season lists, and individual episodes from this period dominate best-of lists. The combination of creative confidence, production quality, cultural relevance, and consistent output created a run many fans point to as Family Guy at its absolute best. The show's ability during this period to balance different types of comedy, from crude shock humor to more sophisticated satire, from absurdist cutaways to genuine character moments, created a viewing experience that could appeal to many kinds of comedy fans, reaching a broad audience rather than a narrow niche. Please subscribe if you are getting something out of this breakdown. Yet, even within this peak, subtle shifts in storytelling and structure were beginning to emerge that would grow more pronounced as the show moved into its next phase. Season 8, airing from 2009 to 2010, marks a transitional stretch in which the show remained capable of producing highly praised episodes, while also showing the first signs of the creative and tonal shifts that would define later seasons. It serves as a useful case study in how the perceived quality of a long-running show can become mixed, with individual episodes varying significantly in reception. Understanding Season 8 means recognizing both its strengths and the ways it departed from the patterns that defined the peak period. The premiere, Road to the Multiverse, stands as one of the highest-rated Family Guy episodes ever in both fan and critical estimation. It followed Stewie and Brian traveling through alternate universes with a remote Stewie had invented, letting them visit worlds with different rules, aesthetics, and tones. The creativity in imagining these universes was remarkable, ranging from a Disney-style animated world to a robot chicken-style stop-motion universe to a world drawn like a classic political cartoon. Each required different animation techniques, showing a level of production ambition beyond typical episodes, and the episode earned praise for its creativity, technical execution, and the way it used the premise to comment on animation itself, ultimately winning an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, Family Guy's first win in that category. The acclaim for Road to the Multiverse set high expectations that the rest of the season struggled to consistently meet. When a premiere is recognized as one of a show's best, subsequent episodes risk feeling like letdowns even when they are objectively solid, and the premiere's excellence made it harder for the season to sustain the same ambition and execution. Family Guy had Peter discovering Jewish ancestry and converting to Judaism, generating cultural and religious comedy that produced both amusement and controversy, though some critics felt the jokes were less sharp than the show's earlier handling of similar material. Spies reminiscent of Us served as a tribute to Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd, who guest-starred and leaned on espionage themes and chase sequences for action comedy that departed from the show's usual structure, though some fans felt it prioritized the guest stars over the regular characters, creating an imbalance that made the episode feel less distinctly Family Guy. Brian's Got a Brand New Bag had Brian dating a significantly older woman, drawing comedy from the age gap and Peter's discomfort, showing the show could still find new relationship dynamics even if the execution was not as strong as earlier relationship episodes. Hannah Banana parodied Miley Cyrus and the Hannah Montana phenomenon, with Stewie obsessing over a teen pop star, reflecting the show's continued engagement with contemporary pop culture, though some critics noted that references were becoming more prominent relative to character-driven comedy. Road to the North Pole, the third Road to Special, sent Stewie and Brian to kill Santa Claus after a bad mall Santa experience, subverting Christmas special conventions while delivering genuine stakes and surprising emotional resonance with strong animation and musical elements that justified its higher budget. Extra Large Medium became one of the show's most controversial episodes over a joke about Sarah Palin's son Trig that drew significant media attention and criticism from Palin herself, demonstrating the show could still generate genuine public response, though some observers felt the controversy seemed more manufactured than earlier ones, suggesting the show might be courting outrage more deliberately. Go Stewie. Go had Stewie disguising himself as a girl to join a show, playing with gender identity through its absurdist premise and generally landing well with fans, though some critics felt it did not push boundaries as effectively as earlier seasons might have. The Splendid Source followed Peter, Joe, and Quagmire tracking down the origin of a dirty joke, using the quest to comment on joke-telling itself in a meta way, and while it was moderately well-received, some felt it represented Family Guy becoming too self-referential at the expense of more straightforward comedy. Critical reception of Season 8 as a whole was notably more mixed than Seasons 5 through 7. While Road to the Multiverse earned near-universal praise and the season had other well-regarded episodes, reviewers began noting patterns that would grow more pronounced later, including a heavier reliance on pop culture references over character-driven comedy, more formulaic cutaway usage, and occasional episodes that felt like they were going through familiar motions rather than finding fresh approaches. Fan reception showed more variation than previous peak seasons, too. Dedicated fans still enjoyed most episodes, and the audience held, but online discussions began, including more criticism and disappointment alongside the praise, with some fans feeling the show was not as consistently funny as it had been while others defended it. That split marked a shift from the more unified enthusiasm of earlier peak seasons. The season's ratings remained solid overall, and Family Guy continued to perform well in its Sunday slot and hold its value to Fox, though there were signs that ratings growth had plateaued or slightly declined compared to seasons 5 through 7. Still successful by most measures, the show was no longer on the upward trajectory of the post-revival period. The animation showed continued technical polish and refinement, looking smoother than ever, but some fans felt the increased polish was moving the show's aesthetic away from what had once made it visually distinctive, the cleaner, more computer-assisted look feeling less rough and immediate. The writing reflected staff turnover, as some writers from the peak period had moved on and new writers had joined, a natural evolution that can bring fresh perspectives but also shift a show's sensibility and comic voice. The changes were subtle in Season 8, but would become more pronounced later. The cutaways began showing patterns some critics called formulaic or repetitive. Where earlier cutaways had felt unpredictable and fresh, some Season 8 cutaways felt like variations on established patterns or less carefully integrated. The density stayed high, preserving the rapid-fire style, but some fans felt the quality of individual gags was slipping even as quantity held. The balance between crude shock humor and more sophisticated comedy shifted somewhat, with some critics noting the show leaning more heavily on gross-out humor than during the peak, and episodes like Brian's Got a Brand New Bag and Jerome is the New Black featured material some viewers found more uncomfortable than funny, suggesting the show might be losing its ability to balance different types of comedy. Celebrity guest appearances remained frequent, and while they could add novelty and draw viewers, some critics felt the show was leaning increasingly on cameos to generate interest rather than trusting its core characters and writing. The road to episodes remained highlights that generally earned positive reception, suggesting that when Family Guy invested in higher concept, more ambitious episodes, it could still deliver something special, evidence that its capacity for excellence had not vanished even if it was being applied less consistently. The musical numbers in Season 8, particularly in Road to the North Pole, showed continued strong production values and creativity, remaining a strength that could elevate episodes and provide variety. The season's engagement with current events and topical humor grew more pronounced, addressing contemporary political and cultural figures, which made episodes feel current at broadcast, but also meant they aged less well as references dated, whereas earlier seasons had balanced topical material with more timeless comedy. The handling of ongoing character development and continuity showed the show still willing to occasionally develop its characters or create persistent consequences, though the balance remained weighted heavily toward episodic storytelling, with most episodes resetting to baseline. In retrospect, Season 8 represents a pivot point where the show remained capable of excellence, as Road to the Multiverse and other strong episodes proved, while also showing the early signs of the patterns behind later seasons' more mixed reception. It did not represent a sudden drop so much as the beginning of gradual shifts in approach, consistency, and balance that would become more apparent over time. If you are enjoying this, do take a second to subscribe. This mixed reception foreshadowed broader shifts in how fans and critics would perceive the show's direction, especially as it entered its second decade on the air. By the time Family Guy reached its 10th season in 2011, the conversation among fans and critics had begun to shift in notable ways. The show remained popular and commercially successful, drawing solid ratings and holding its place in Fox's Sunday animation block, but a growing segment of the fan base started voicing dissatisfaction with its direction. Season 10 specifically became a focal point in discussions about when Family Guy stopped feeling like it was operating at peak quality, with many fans pointing to it as a noticeable departure from the creative heights of earlier years. The shift in perception did not happen suddenly or uniformly. The show had accumulated millions of viewers, and different segments of the audience had different relationships with it, and different expectations. Longtime fans who had watched since 1999 held one perspective. Fans who discovered the show during the revival held another, and newer viewers who came through syndication or streaming held yet another, each experiencing Season 10 and beyond through a different lens of familiarity and expectation. Online fan communities, far larger than in the show's early years, became spaces where dissatisfaction could be voiced and amplified. Forums, Reddit discussions, and social media let fans share critiques and find others who felt the same. And this collective expression created a narrative that Family Guy was declining, a narrative that gained momentum as more fans articulated similar feelings. The internet's ability to aggregate and amplify these opinions made the perception of decline feel more widespread than it might have in an earlier, less connected era. Season 10 itself provided material that both satisfied and disappointed different viewers. The premiere, Lottery Fever, had the Griffins winning the lottery and dealing with sudden wealth, a relatively conventional sitcom premise that some fans felt relied too heavily on predictable beats. It was not universally panned, but it did not generate the enthusiasm or memorable moments of earlier premieres. Screams of Silence. The story of Brenda Q tackled domestic violence through Quagmire's sister being in an abusive relationship, attempting to address a serious subject while retaining comedic elements, a tonal balance many viewers found uncomfortable or inappropriate, and it sparked debate about whether Family Guy could or should take on serious social issues, with some praising the attempt and others feeling the comedic approach trivialized the subject. Back to the Pilot revisited the time travel concept, with Brian and Stewie returning to the show's first episode, allowing meta-commentary on how the show had changed, though some fans felt the execution did not fully capitalize on the premise and was more interested in pointing out differences than exploring them. Meg and Quagmire featured inappropriate sexual content involving Meg that many fans found uncomfortable rather than funny, pushing boundaries in ways that drew criticism even from viewers generally at ease with the show's crude humor, and it became an example critics pointed to as evidence that Family Guy was confusing shock value with actual comedy, relying on being offensive without crafting jokes that justified the offense. Brian's play featured Brian writing a terrible play and being unable to accept criticism, satirizing artistic pretension, and was generally better received, suggesting the show could still produce solid episodes when focusing on character-driven comedy, though even the well-received Season 10 episodes tended to be described as good rather than great, lacking the spark that had made peak-era episodes feel special. Fan rankings and season tier lists circulating online consistently placed Season 10 below Seasons 4 through 7. Rankings are subjective and vary among individuals, but the aggregate pattern showed Season 10 viewed less favorably, and it became a reference point in discussions of the show's trajectory, frequently cited as where the decline became undeniable for viewers who had been willing to give earlier seasons the benefit of the doubt. The conversation about the perceived decline often centered on the show feeling more formulaic and predictable than at its peak. Fans said they could anticipate joke structures, that cutaways felt more routine, and that character behaviors had become exaggerated to the point of caricature, suggesting that familiarity was breeding a kind of contempt, as patterns that once felt fresh now felt tired through repetition. The density of pop culture references became a specific point of criticism. Family Guy had always incorporated pop culture, but critics felt the show was increasingly using references as substitutes for actual jokes rather than as elements within jokes, and a cutaway referencing a movie or show without meaningful commentary or a creative twist felt lazy compared to earlier seasons' more sophisticated use of the same material. The show's approach to meta-humor and self-awareness also evolved in ways that divided audiences. Family Guy had always included meta-jokes and fourth wall breaks, but Season 10-era episodes seemed increasingly focused on commenting on themselves, on television production, and on the show's own reception rather than on external targets. Some viewers enjoyed this self-referential approach, while others felt it signaled creative exhaustion, with the show having less to say about the world and more to say about itself. The emotional tone of Season 10 felt different to many viewers as well. Family Guy had never been primarily concerned with emotional depth, but earlier seasons had occasionally delivered genuine emotional moments that felt earned. Season 10 seemed less interested in or capable of achieving these, with attempts at sentimentality feeling more perfunctory or even ironic, as if the show were embarrassed by earnestness. The treatment of characters reflected what some fans identified as Flanderization, in which characters become exaggerated versions of their defining traits rather than fully realized personalities. Peter seemed dumber and more selfish, Brian more pretentious and hypocritical, and Meg's status as family punching bag intensified to levels some viewers found mean-spirited rather than funny, all of which created a sense that the show was running on cruise control, amplifying established traits rather than finding new dimensions. The political and social commentary drew mixed responses too. Family Guy had always included political material, generally mocking both conservative and liberal positions, but Season 10 era episodes seemed less interested in balanced satire and more willing to make straightforward political statements. For some viewers that represented clearer values, while for others it meant a loss of the irreverent, all-sides mockery of earlier seasons. The animation was technically superior in many ways, with smoother movement, more detailed backgrounds, and cleaner line work. But that increased polish contributed to a sense that the show had lost its visual personality. The rougher, more hand-drawn aesthetic of earlier seasons, having given the show a particular look that the more digitally refined animation lacked, so that technical improvement paradoxically made it feel less distinctive. The voice acting remained professional and competent, with the core cast delivering effectively, but some fans felt the performances seemed more routine, delivered efficiently without the energy of earlier seasons, a perception that might reflect familiarity more than any real change, yet still fed the sense that Season 10 represented the show on autopilot. The musical elements continued to show high production values, but their increased frequency made them feel less special, what had once been a treat becoming expected and reducing the impact of the musical comedy. The show's engagement with current events kept emphasizing topical humor, referencing contemporary political figures, celebrity scandals, and cultural moments, which made episodes feel current at broadcast but caused them to age quickly, so that watching them years later often required remembering or looking up what was happening culturally in 2011 and 2012 to understand the jokes. Guest star appearances remained frequent, but the novelty had worn off, and their presence no longer generated the excitement it once had, feeling more routine as celebrities appeared because Family Guy was a platform they could access rather than because their involvement added something unique. Critical reception from professional critics was largely negative or indifferent, with reviewers who still covered the show expressing fatigue and disappointment, though critical opinion mattered less for Family Guy than audience response and ratings, which stayed solid enough to justify renewal. That disconnect reflected a pattern where the show had a devoted audience that kept watching regardless of critical consensus. DVD sales and streaming viewership for Season 10 showed some decline compared to peak seasons, though the show remained commercially viable across platforms as the broader shift toward streaming was beginning to change how shows like Family Guy were monetized and measured. Fan discussions about Season 10 often invoked nostalgia for earlier seasons, with viewers wishing the show still felt like it did during Seasons 4 through 7, and that nostalgia complicated assessments since the season was being judged not just on its own merits, but against idealized memories, a comparison it could never win because it could not recapture the novelty and freshness that came simply from arriving first. Online discourse sometimes turned to whether the show should end, with some arguing it had run its course and others maintaining it still had value, even short of peak quality, reflecting a broader question about how long successful shows should continue. The decline narrative was not universally accepted, and many fans kept enjoying the show and found the criticism exaggerated or unfair, arguing that it was being held to impossible standards, that comedy is subjective, and that Family Guy was still funnier than most alternatives, a split that fueled ongoing debate within fan communities. Consider subscribing before we continue. This perception of decline leads directly into examining what precisely changed in the show's humor and comedic approach compared to the sharp satire that had defined its peak years. The evolution of Family Guy's comedy style from its early seasons through season 10 and beyond is one of the most frequently discussed aspects of its perceived decline. Understanding what changed requires examining the specific types of humor the show used, how those types shifted in frequency and execution, and what those shifts meant for the viewing experience. The transformation from fresh, boundary-pushing satire to more formulaic, familiar comedy did not happen overnight, but by season 10, the cumulative effect of gradual changes had created a noticeably different comedic landscape than what defined the Golden Age. Early episodes, especially in seasons 1 through 3, employed satire that felt genuinely sharp and willing to challenge audiences. The show mocked political figures, cultural institutions, television itself, and American life with an edge that came from real irreverence rather than calculated offensiveness. Let's go to The Hop from season 2, which satirized anti-drug campaigns through an absurd storyline about toad licking, used exaggeration and absurdity to make a point about moral panic and ineffective messaging around drugs. The satire had a target and a perspective, using comedy to critique something specific. The cutaway gags in early seasons often served satirical purposes beyond just generating laughs. When Peter compared a situation to something else and the show cut away to illustrate it, the cutaway frequently carried social commentary or observation embedded within the absurdist premise, so that the randomness masked sophisticated comedy that rewarded viewers who caught the implications beyond the surface joke. The early seasons also satirized the medium of television itself, joking about sitcom conventions, production, and audience expectations, and that meta-awareness felt fresh because it was deployed selectively rather than constantly, creating moments where the show stepped back to comment on the artificiality of its own narrative while maintaining variety in comedic approach. As the show moved into its revival and peak in seasons 4 through 7, the satire remained present and often quite effective. PTV directly challenged FCC censorship through extended musical numbers and a narrative that made clear points about free speech and moral policing, and the show was willing to hold perspectives and use comedy to advocate for them, creating satire that felt purposeful even when wrapped in crude or absurdist humor. The various Road to specials frequently included satirical elements alongside their adventure narratives, commenting on historical periods, social attitudes, or cultural phenomena while keeping the stories entertaining, a sophisticated integration of satire into larger structures. Subtle shifts, however, were already beginning during the peak that would grow more pronounced later. The cutaways were becoming more frequent and more random, sometimes losing the satirical edge or social observation that had made earlier ones feel substantial. As the show aged, the cutaways increasingly functioned as opportunities for rapid-fire gags rather than moments of commentary, changing their role from commentary devices to pure joke delivery systems. By season 10, many fans and critics observed that cutaways felt interchangeable and formulaic. The structure had become familiar. A character mentions something, often with phrasing like, "This is worse than the time I," or "You know what this reminds me of," and the show cuts to an unrelated scene illustrating the comparison. The setups became predictable, and the cutaway scenes often relied on recognition or reference, rather than adding new comedic ideas. The distinction between satire and reference grew increasingly important in understanding the shift. Satire uses exaggeration, irony, or ridicule to criticize or comment on something, creating meaning beyond acknowledging that the thing exists, while a reference simply calls attention to something familiar, assuming that recognition itself is amusing. Early Family Guy generally satirized even when it referenced, while later Family Guy increasingly just referenced without adding a satirical perspective. Season 10 episodes frequently included purely referential cutaways, showing a scene from a movie or show with Family Guy characters inserted without fundamentally changing or commenting on the source. The humor relied on viewers recognizing the reference and finding the incongruity amusing, an approach that wore thin for many who felt recognition. Humor was less satisfying than jokes actually built on the foundation of a reference. The pop culture knowledge required to appreciate the show had always been part of its appeal, but the balance shifted over time toward requiring more specific knowledge while providing less payoff for having it. Early seasons took a cultural reference and transformed it through the show's perspective, while later seasons increasingly presented references relatively unchanged, making the reference itself the entire joke. The density of references in Season 10 era episodes meant viewers were expected to recognize multiple movies, shows, celebrities, and cultural moments in each episode, which rewarded broad pop culture knowledge, but also created barriers for viewers less familiar with American pop culture or too young to remember older references, potentially narrowing the show's accessibility even as it retained its core audience. The approach to controversial or boundary-pushing humor also evolved in ways that affected comedic impact. Early Family Guy generated controversy by joking about genuinely taboo subjects or approaching familiar ones from unexpected angles, the boundary pushing motivated by comedic vision rather than a desire to shock. By Season 10, some of the controversial material felt more calculated, with the show seeming to deliberately court outrage without the jokes justifying the offensive content. The mean-spirited quality of some Season 10 humor represented another shift. Family Guy had never been gentle, but early cruelty generally served satirical purposes or targeted characters in ways that felt justified by comedic context, whereas Season 10 era episodes sometimes included meanness that felt gratuitous, with characters being cruel to each other in ways that served no narrative or comedic purpose beyond shock. The treatment of Meg became particularly notable, with the family's abuse intensifying to levels many viewers found uncomfortable rather than funny. Early seasons had established Meg as unpopular and somewhat neglected, mining comedy from her social struggles. But by Season 10, the abuse had escalated to physical violence, extreme verbal cruelty, and expressions of genuine hatred, so that what began as satirizing family dynamics had evolved into something mean-spirited without clear satirical purpose. The balance among different types of comedy shifted noticeably. Early Family Guy mixed physical comedy, verbal wit, satirical commentary, absurdist premises, pop culture parody, and character-based humor in proportions that created variety within and across episodes, while Season 10 relied more heavily on certain types while neglecting others, with cutaway density increasing as character-based comedy decreased and the fundamental texture of episodes changing. Writing efficiency also seemed to decline. Early episodes felt tightly written, with setups and payoffs carefully structured even within absurdist narratives, jokes building on each other, and callbacks adding layers, whereas Season 10 episodes sometimes felt looser, with jokes that did not quite land, setups without adequate payoffs, or gags that ran too long without developing or escalating. The self-awareness and meta-humor that had always been part of the show's identity became more dominant in ways some viewers felt undermined other comedy. When a show constantly comments on itself, acknowledges its formulas, or jokes about being a TV show, it creates distance between audience and content, which can be funny in strategic doses but, when overused, prevents the audience from investing in narratives or caring about characters. The relationship between setup and punchline evolved too, with early seasons generally following comedy principles where setups established expectations that punchlines subverted or fulfilled unexpectedly, while later seasons sometimes abandoned those principles, producing comedy that felt sloppier or less carefully constructed. The timing and pacing shifted subtly as well. Early Family Guy had found a rhythm balancing rapid-fire cutaways with more sustained sequences and character moments, while Season 10 sometimes rushed through material or dragged jokes past their natural endpoints, an inconsistency that made episodes feel less polished and affected how successfully jokes landed. Visual comedy had always been a strength, with the animation enabling sight gags that complemented the verbal humor. But Season 10 era episodes sometimes relied less on visual creativity and more on verbal references or shock, the animation remaining technically proficient yet deployed less inventively, resulting in episodes that felt more talk-heavy and less visually dynamic. Violence and gross-out humor intensified too. Family Guy had always included such content, but early seasons generally used it purposefully, while Season 10 sometimes included violence or gross content that felt excessive or unmotivated, existing for its own sake. Extended sequences of characters being injured in elaborate, painful ways became more common and more extreme, and what had once been brief moments of cartoon violence stretched into longer sequences. Some viewers found tedious or unpleasant, the joke seeming to be the violence itself rather than the violence serving a comedic purpose. The political humor evolved from mocking all sides relatively equally to taking clearer positions while still trying to maintain irreverence, and Season 10 episodes sometimes struggled to balance perspective with the show's traditionally amoral, omnidirectional mockery, producing political comedy that satisfied neither the desire for clear satire nor the preference for purely offensive humor. The quality of pop culture parodies also declined in execution. Early parodies, like the Willy Wonka segment in Wasted Talent, took source material and transformed it through the show's lens, while demonstrating detailed knowledge of what was being parodied, whereas later parodies sometimes felt more superficial, hitting obvious beats without adding sufficient new comedic ideas. Celebrity impersonations and references reflected the same shift toward recognition over satire. Early seasons impersonated celebrities as part of making points about fame, media, or specific behaviors, while Season 10 sometimes referenced a celebrity simply to acknowledge that the celebrity existed without adding commentary, leaving the references hollow. The musical comedy, a strength during the peak, also became formulaic by Season 10, with early musical numbers feeling special and strategically deployed, while later ones appeared frequently enough to lose their event status and sometimes felt less carefully crafted or integrated into an episode's overall comedic vision. Subscribe if this is worth your while before we move on. These humor shifts intersect directly with how characters were portrayed and developed, as the evolution of the cast reflects broader changes in narrative direction and comedic priorities. The evolution of Family Guy's characters from their early incarnations through Season 10 and beyond is one of the clearest indicators of how the show changed. Character development, or the lack of it, became a focal point in discussions of the perceived decline. Many fans and critics observed that characters who once felt like recognizable people with distinct personalities and believable motivations gradually became exaggerated caricatures defined entirely by their most extreme traits. This process, often called Flanderization, after a similar evolution of Ned Flanders on The Simpsons, affected nearly every major character in ways that altered how episodes worked and how audiences connected with the show. Peter Griffin's transformation exemplifies it. In early seasons, he was a well-meaning father and husband who struggled with responsibility and impulse control, made poor decisions, and behaved selfishly, yet also showed genuine love for his family, felt remorse when he hurt people, and occasionally displayed insight or emotional depth. Death Has a Shadow. From Season 1 showed him trying to fix his mistakes and ultimately facing consequences while maintaining family bonds, so his character had dimensions that made him more than just a source of chaos. As the seasons progressed, Peter's stupidity and selfishness intensified to levels that strained believability even within the absurdist framework. By Season 10, he was portrayed as almost impossibly unintelligent, unable to grasp basic concepts or remember simple information, and his selfishness extended to actively harming his family and friends without apparent concern or remorse. The emotional depth that had occasionally surfaced early on became rare, with Peter functioning primarily as a vehicle for destructive behavior and crude jokes. Screams of silence. The story of Brenda Q showed this flanderization in stark terms, with Peter displaying such extreme insensitivity and stupidity in a domestic abuse situation that his behavior became hard to reconcile with the character who had shown capacity for growth and empathy, the flanderization having progressed to the point where he could not function appropriately even in serious situations, limiting the stories the show could tell with him. Lois Griffin's evolution reflected the show's changing priorities and tone. Early seasons established her as the responsible parent trying to manage her chaotic family, while occasionally revealing her rebellious past and capacity for wildness. A grounding force who was also a fully realized character with her own desires, frustrations, and contradictions, as episodes like Lethal Weapons from Season 3 showed. By Season 10, Lois had become a character whose primary functions were tolerating Peter's behavior and occasionally expressing frustration before ultimately accepting whatever chaos he had created. Her own personality grew less defined, the show seeming uncertain what role she should play beyond being Peter's wife and the family's designated adult, and the rebellious or wild aspects appeared less frequently and, when they did, felt more like plot devices than organic expressions of her personality. Meg Griffin's transformation is perhaps the most extreme example of flanderization in the cast. Early seasons established her as unpopular at school and somewhat overlooked by her family, generating comedy from realistic teenage struggles with social acceptance and family dynamics, the humor coming from recognizable situations exaggerated for effect, while Meg remained a sympathetic character whose struggles audiences could relate to. The intensification of her role as family punching bag fundamentally changed both her character and the show's tone. By Season 10, she was subjected to extreme verbal abuse, physical violence, and expressions of genuine hatred from her family. Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10 attempted to address this by having Meg stand up to her family, only for her to ultimately accept her role as scapegoat because the family supposedly needed someone to abuse, a resolution suggesting the show was aware of how her treatment had evolved, yet chose to embrace and justify it rather than course correct. The shift reflected broader changes in the show's approach to relationships. Early seasons showed family members who genuinely cared about each other despite conflict and dysfunction, while later seasons increasingly portrayed family relationships as purely antagonistic, with characters expressing active dislike or indifference, which made the show feel meaner and reduced the opportunities for the emotional moments that had once balanced the crude humor. Chris Griffin stayed relatively stable compared to the others, though he too showed signs of flanderization. Early seasons portrayed him as dim and awkward, yet sweet-natured and occasionally insightful, his artistic talent and sensitivity giving him dimensions beyond just being the stupid son. But by Season 10, his stupidity had intensified, and his characterization focused increasingly on gross or disturbing behavior rather than his more sympathetic qualities, making him less nuanced and more purely a source of uncomfortable comedy. Stewie Griffin's evolution is one of the most dramatic in the series. Early seasons presented him as an evil genius baby plotting world domination and matricide, speaking with a British accent and possessing intelligence wildly incongruous with his infant status, an absurd premise that generated unique comedy and enabled storylines unavailable to other characters, as a Mission Impossible from Season 3 showed. As the seasons progressed, his murderous intentions and world domination plots gradually disappeared, replaced by a character defined primarily by his relationship with Brian and his ambiguous sexuality. By Season 10, Stewie rarely if ever discussed killing Lois or taking over the world, his defining early traits apparently abandoned, and the show never explicitly addressed the change, creating continuity confusion about whether he had changed or the earlier characterization had simply been forgotten. The shift opened some new comedic avenues, particularly in the road to episodes where his dynamic with Brian drove adventure stories, but it also lost the character's original edge, the baby who had once been a genuine threat becoming primarily a source of gay panic jokes and cultural commentary. Brian Griffin's transformation became one of the most discussed. Early seasons established him as the voice of reason and liberal conscience, the intellectual who commented on the absurdity around him while maintaining his own flaws and contradictions, as Brian in Love from Season 2 showed. As the seasons progressed, Brian increasingly became a vehicle for the show to mock liberal pretension and pseudo-intellectualism. His hypocrisy, self-importance, and failed artistic ambitions emphasized until he transformed from sympathetic intellectual into an insufferable, pretentious failure. Brian writes a bestseller from Season 9 centered entirely on mocking his literary pretensions, with the character having evolved into someone whose every attempt at intellectual or artistic achievement was destined for failure and ridicule. By Season 10, Brian had become so unlikable that his role often involved being punished or humiliated for his pretensions. The character who had once served as audience surrogate and voice of reason becoming someone the show seemed to actively dislike, which limited the kinds of episodes that could feature him prominently while maintaining audience sympathy. The supporting characters showed flanderization patterns too. Glenn Quagmire evolved from sex-obsessed neighbor to a character whose sexual deviancy reached criminal levels, the jokes about him becoming darker and less playful. Joe Swanson's defining trait as a disabled police officer became the sole focus of his characterization, with episodes using his disability for shock humor rather than as one aspect of a fully realized person. Cleveland Brown's mild-mannered personality intensified to the point of passive ineffectuality before he left for his own spin-off. The flanderization limited narrative possibilities and reduced the emotional range episodes could achieve, because characters defined entirely by extreme traits cannot participate in nuanced storytelling or generate comedy from realistic situations, becoming tools for delivering specific jokes rather than people whose personalities could generate comedy through their interactions. The loss of depth also made it harder for audiences to connect. Early Family Guy let viewers care about characters even while laughing at their flaws, whereas the exaggerated later versions made emotional investment difficult because the characters no longer behaved in ways connected to recognizable human psychology, becoming purely comedic constructs rather than characters within a coherent world. The transformations created continuity issues too, with episodes referencing earlier characterizations or relationships without acknowledging how drastically characters had changed, and flashback episodes highlighting the disconnect between early and later versions, making internal continuity feel inconsistent. Some defenders argued that character evolution was natural and necessary for a long-running show, that static characters would become boring, and that flanderization enabled new types of comedy, holding that Family Guy was a comedy where consistency mattered less than laughs. Critics countered by pointing to other long-running animated comedies that maintained character consistency while still evolving. The Simpsons, despite its own quality debates, had largely preserved core character traits, and South Park had evolved its characters while keeping their fundamental personalities recognizable, suggesting that flanderization was a choice rather than an inevitability. The narrative direction shifted in response to the character changes. Early seasons could tell stories about family dynamics, personal growth, relationship conflicts, and emotional struggles because characters had enough depth to support them, while later seasons increasingly relied on high-concept premises, elaborate parodies, or shock humor because the flanderized characters could not support more grounded storytelling. Season 10 episodes frequently featured premises that were purely vehicles for jokes rather than stories emerging from character motivations, with characters inserted into situations to facilitate humor without the situations feeling like natural outgrowths of who the characters were, which made episodes feel more arbitrary and less connected to a coherent world. The relationship dynamics suffered as well. The friendship between Peter and Brian, central to many classic episodes, became less prominent as both characters grew more extreme. The marriage between Peter and Lois became harder to understand as they evolved into people with seemingly nothing in common, and the family unit itself felt less like a family and more like a collection of individuals who happened to share a house. A quick subscribe helps a lot before we press on. Character portrayal connects directly to thematic and narrative innovation, areas where the show's experimentation with structure and meta-humor generated increasingly mixed responses. As Family Guy progressed, particularly from Season 8 onward, it showed an increasing willingness to experiment with episode structure, narrative technique, and different comedic approaches that departed from its established formula. This experimentation represented the creative team trying to keep the show fresh and avoid complete predictability. But audience reactions were notably mixed, with some experiments praised for ambition and creativity, and others criticized as self-indulgent or as losing sight of what made the show work. The Road to Episodes were one of its most successful experimental formats. Beginning with Road to Rupert in Season 5, they featured Stewie and Brian on adventures with higher production values, different animation styles, and more cinematic storytelling than standard episodes. Road to the Multiverse from Season 8 showcased the format at its peak, its multiverse premise allowing radical experimentation with animation techniques ranging from Disney-style hand-drawn animation to robot chicken-style stop-motion to realistic CGI. The episode's success, including an Emmy win and consistent ranking among the best Family Guy episodes ever, demonstrated that when the show committed fully to experimental concepts with adequate resources and execution, audiences responded enthusiastically, and it proved that deviation from standard structure could enhance rather than detract from the show when done with clear vision and quality execution. The Road to Episodes also represented a departure from the show's core concept of family sitcom comedy, essentially functioning as standalone adventure stories that could have featured any two characters with good chemistry rather than specifically requiring the Griffin family context. As they became more frequent and elaborate, some fans questioned whether they represented Family Guy at its best, or the show compensating for an inability to generate quality comedy from its standard format. The production resources devoted to them were substantial, each entry requiring more time, money, and staff than a regular episode, with the different animation styles demanding specialized animators and the musical numbers requiring composers, arrangers, and recording sessions with full orchestras, all of which demonstrated Fox's commitment to Family Guy as a premium property. The anthology episodes were another experimental format the show used with varying success. Installments like Family Guy Viewer Mail from Season 3 and Season 10's Viewer Mail Number 2 presented multiple short stories within a single episode, often featuring the regular characters in alternate scenarios, letting the show try different ideas without committing entire episodes to concepts that might not sustain full narratives. The anthology format also allowed experimentation with different animation styles, time periods, and genres within single episodes, as Three Kings from Season 7 showed by presenting Stephen King parodies, giving writers freedom to explore ideas that would not fit conventional episodes. Anthology episodes also highlighted the challenge of maintaining quality across multiple short stories, since weak segments could not be avoided when interspersed with stronger material, and audience reactions varied based on how successful individual segments were and whether the format felt justified or merely a gimmick. The increasing use of meta-humor and fourth wall breaking was another major experimental direction. While the show had always included some self-aware jokes, from season 8 onward this intensified, with episodes regularly referencing their own structure, acknowledging contrivances, commenting on the show's reputation, or joking about production and network requirements. And then there were fewer. From season 9 was an ambitious experiment, a murder mystery parody over a full hour-long special that gathered the extended cast at a mansion where characters were systematically murdered in a parody of classic mystery stories. The extended runtime allowed more elaborate plotting and more sustained tension than typical episodes, reflecting the show's confidence that it could hold attention for twice its normal length. The mystery structure worked reasonably well, the character deaths created genuine surprise, and the episode felt like an event that justified its special status, though some critics noted that its dark tone and murder of established characters felt at odds with the show's typically consequence-free structure, and that subsequent episodes largely ignored the deaths, undermining their supposed permanence. Those deaths, including Muriel Goldman, Diane Simmons, and James Woods among others, were treated as permanent within continuity, an unusual commitment to consequences for the show, though the murdered characters were largely minor recurring figures rather than core cast, limiting the actual impact. The increasing frequency of musical episodes and sequences was another experimental trend that drew mixed reaction. While earlier seasons used songs sparingly for special effect, later seasons incorporated musical numbers with growing regularity, generally at high production values, with elaborate choreography, detailed animation, and full orchestration. Road to the North Pole from Season 8 featured multiple numbers that served both comedic and narrative functions, the songs often genuinely well-crafted while containing jokes and advancing plots. But the frequency led some viewers to feel that songs were becoming a crutch deployed when writers were uncertain how else to fill time or create memorable moments. The parody episodes that devoted entire runtimes to recreating specific movies or stories were perhaps the show's most ambitious structural experiments. The Star Wars parodies, Blue Harvest, Something, 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 Dark Side, and It's a Trap, retold the original trilogy with Family Guy characters and humor, requiring enormous production effort to recreate iconic scenes, dialogue, and visuals, while adding the comedic sensibility. Fans of both Family Guy and Star Wars often appreciated the detailed recreation and the added jokes, but critics questioned whether essentially retelling existing stories with different character designs represented genuine creativity or was merely an elaborate reference substituting recognition for original comedy. The specials were financially successful enough to justify their costs through DVD sales and viewership, though their relationship to the show's core identity remained debatable. The increasing use of shock content was another form of experimentation, with later seasons testing how far they could go with offensive or disturbing material. Episodes featured graphic violence, sexual content, or jokes about sensitive subjects that earlier seasons might have approached more carefully or avoided, and this experimentation with extremity generated strong reactions both ways. Some viewers appreciated the willingness to push boundaries and make jokes other shows would not attempt, seeing it as the show maintaining its irreverent identity in an increasingly sensitive cultural environment and arguing that comedy should be allowed to offend. Others felt the shock content crossed into being offensive for its own sake, with the distinction between pushing boundaries to make a point through satire and simply being provocative to grab attention becoming increasingly unclear, some shocking content feeling calculated to generate controversy and media coverage rather than emerging from genuine comedic vision. The experimental formats sometimes broke traditional narrative structure entirely, with episodes abandoning conventional plotting for stream-of-consciousness sequences, extended cutaway chains where one cutaway led to another, or deliberately nonsensical storylines that refused coherent resolution, testing whether the show could function without the basic storytelling framework that even absurdist comedy typically maintains. Viewer Mail Number 2 from Season 10 included a segment deliberately mocking coherent storytelling by presenting a Family Guy episode, supposedly written by a manatee, randomly selecting idea balls, referencing South Park's criticism of the show's writing process, a self-aware mockery of its own methods that represented meta-humor at its most extreme, with Family Guy essentially agreeing with the criticism while also defending its approach as intentionally random. Audience reactions to these experiments divided along several lines. Some viewers appreciated any deviation from formula and enjoyed experimental episodes for their novelty and ambition, seeing them as evidence that the creative team was still trying to innovate rather than coasting, and valuing even failed experiments for demonstrating creative risk-taking. Others preferred the traditional format and felt experimental episodes represented the show losing confidence in its core identity, wanting episodes with the Griffin family in Quahog dealing with recognizable sitcom situations, so that experiments departing dramatically from that formula felt like different shows that happened to feature Family Guy characters. Critical reception was similarly divided, with critics tired of the standard format sometimes praising experiments as refreshing, and critics who valued consistency often viewing them as distractions or as evidence that the team had run out of ideas for conventional episodes. The commercial performance of experimental episodes offered some data, though it was complicated. Special episodes and anthology formats often drew higher initial viewership from promotion and novelty, but that did not necessarily mean audiences preferred experimental formats, since special events naturally attract more attention regardless of quality. DVD and streaming performance also showed mixed patterns, with some experiments like Road to the Multiverse showing strong repeat viewership and others showing less sustained interest. The balance between experimentation and consistency became an ongoing challenge, since too much consistency risked staleness, while too much experimentation risked alienating fans who wanted reliable entertainment, and finding the right balance required understanding which core elements needed to stay constant and which could be modified. The experimentation also reflected the realities of producing hundreds of episodes, since creative teams need variety and new challenges to stay enthusiastic and avoid burnout, and experimental episodes gave writers, animators, and voice actors chances to try new approaches that felt fresh, a creative refreshment that could benefit the show overall, even when individual experiments did not fully succeed. Hit subscribe before the next stretch if you are finding this useful. The show's evolution through experimentation reflects broader trends in how long-running animated shows balance innovation against consistency, a tension particularly visible in its contemporary reception and ongoing quality debates. The ongoing conversation about Family Guy's quality in its modern era, from Season 10 onward through the 2010s and into the 2020s, reveals a complex and divided fan base grappling with how to assess a show that has been on the air for over 2 decades. Unlike shows that ended at a clear stopping point, Family Guy keeps producing new episodes, creating a moving target for quality assessment, and the debates reflect not just differing opinions about individual episodes, but fundamental disagreements about what the show should be, what standards it should be held to, and how long-running television comedy should be evaluated. The modern viewership represents multiple distinct segments with different relationships to the show. Longtime fans who watched since 1999 bring expectations shaped by early and peak-era episodes, often approaching new episodes through the lens of nostalgia and comparison, measuring contemporary Family Guy against their memories of what it once was, which naturally makes new episodes vulnerable to unfavorable comparison against idealized recollections. Another segment consists of viewers who discovered the show through syndication, streaming, or later seasons, who may have watched episodes out of order, consuming entire seasons rapidly rather than week by week. Their relationship is less about tracking evolution over time and more about the overall body of work as an accessible comedy library. So debates about golden ages and decline may feel less relevant because their experience was never chronological or tied to specific broadcast periods. Younger viewers who came to the show more recently represent yet another perspective, encountering it in its contemporary form without the baggage of earlier eras, so that for them, modern Family Guy is simply Family Guy, not a decline from some previous peak, and their relationship with it exists in a different media context where animated comedies are abundant, and the show is one option among many, rather than a groundbreaking phenomenon. Critical reception from professional critics has generally ranged from negative to indifferent, with most major critics having stopped regularly reviewing the show years ago, treating it as a known quantity not requiring ongoing analysis. When critics do write about it, it is often in the context of broader discussions about long-running television or animated comedy, rather than engaging with specific episodes. The diminished critical attention does not necessarily reflect the show's actual quality so much as the reality that after hundreds of episodes, critics have said what they have to say, and unless episodes represent dramatic departures or generate significant controversy, there is limited motivation to keep covering a show whose basic identity has been analyzed extensively. Online fan communities continue to actively discuss contemporary episodes, with platforms like Reddit, Twitter, and dedicated forums hosting ongoing conversations about new episodes, season quality, and comparisons to earlier eras. And these communities show the divided nature of current reception, with threads about new episodes typically featuring both defenders who enjoy what the show still provides and critics who express disappointment. The Reddit community demonstrates the split clearly, as episode discussion threads typically include comments praising specific jokes alongside comments dismissing episodes as unfunny or inferior, with voting patterns suggesting neither perspective represents a clear majority, reflecting a fan base where multiple viewpoints coexist without resolution. Some contemporary defenders argue the show still produces genuinely funny episodes, and that critics apply unfairly high standards or let nostalgia cloud their judgment, pointing to specific recent episodes they found hilarious, and noting that the show's hit rate for jokes, while imperfect, remains higher than most alternatives, and holding that the show is being judged against an impossible ideal of its own peak rather than against actual competition. The argument often includes the observation that comedy is subjective, that Family Guy has always divided audiences, and that contemporary criticism echoes criticism made about early seasons, so that from this view, the show has not changed as much as some claim, and the perception of decline reflects changed audience expectations more than changed quality. Contemporary critics counter that while comedy is subjective, patterns in joke construction, character consistency, satirical sharpness, and creative ambition can be analyzed relatively objectively, and they argue that later seasons show measurable declines in these areas compared to the peak, so that defending contemporary Family Guy requires ignoring observable changes, and nostalgia is not the only or even primary factor in preferring earlier seasons. The ratings data provides some objective measure, though interpreting it requires context. Viewership has declined from its late 2000s peak, but that decline must be understood within the broader context of declining traditional television viewership across all programming. So comparing current ratings to peak era ratings without accounting for industry-wide changes would be misleading. Within the current landscape, the show continues to perform adequately for Fox, drawing enough viewers to justify renewal and generating revenue through advertising, syndication, and streaming, and it remains part of the Sunday animation block and is still treated as valuable, even if it no longer generates the cultural buzz or massive audiences it once commanded. The streaming availability of all episodes on platforms like Hulu has changed how audiences engage, letting viewers watch any episode from any season at any time, and creating opportunities for direct comparison between eras, which makes it easier to revisit classics and measure contemporary episodes against them, potentially reinforcing perceptions of decline when watching a new episode right after marathoning peak-era seasons. The social media response to new episodes shows patterns distinct from earlier forms of audience response. Twitter reactions are immediate and public, creating real-time collective viewing experiences, and trending topics and hashtags can amplify both positive and negative reactions, creating impressions of consensus that may not reflect actual audience distribution, since a relatively small number of vocal critics or defenders can dominate the conversation in ways that overstate their representativeness. Meme culture also affects reception. Certain scenes, quotes, or moments circulate widely as memes, often divorced from their original context, and these typically come from earlier seasons, reinforcing those seasons' cultural presence, while contemporary episodes generate less meme-worthy content, creating a feedback loop where earlier seasons maintain visibility while newer ones fade from cultural conversation more quickly. The relationship between Family Guy and other adult animated comedies in the contemporary landscape also influences reception. When it premiered, it was one of few adult animated sitcoms alongside The Simpsons and South Park, whereas the current landscape includes numerous animated comedies like Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, and Archer, creating a competitive environment where Family Guy is one option among many, and viewers can compare it not just to its own earlier seasons, but to entirely different shows with different approaches. Some discussions suggest the show's approach feels dated compared to newer shows that learned from its innovations while developing their own identities, with Rick and Morty's blend of science fiction and dark humor, and Bob's Burgers' character-driven wholesome comedy, creating contexts where Family Guy's cutaway-heavy randomness feels like an older model rather than the cutting edge it once represented. Other perspectives note that the show's longevity and continued production represent achievements worthy of respect, since maintaining any creative endeavor for over 20 years is difficult, and the show continues to employ hundreds of people, so that criticizing it for not being what it was at its peak misses the point that long-running shows serve different functions than they did during their initial cultural impact. Contemporary Family Guy also exists in a changed cultural and political environment. Sensitivities around representation, offensive humor, and social responsibility have shifted significantly between 1999 and the 2020s. The show's willingness to joke about any subject regardless of offense was once seen as transgressive and brave, whereas contemporary contexts sometimes view the same approach as punching down or perpetuating harmful stereotypes, a changed environment that affects reception regardless of actual episode quality. Some recent episodes have generated specific controversies that exemplify the changed context, with content that might have passed with minimal comment in earlier eras now generating think pieces, social media campaigns, and calls for the show to be more responsible. And whether these responses represent legitimate evolution in social values or excessive sensitivity depends on perspective. But the changed environment undeniably affects how the show is received and discussed. The question of whether Family Guy should change to accommodate contemporary values or remain true to its original irreverent approach divides both creators and audiences, with some arguing comedy must evolve with cultural understanding and that insisting on the right to offend regardless of context is stubborn adherence to outdated approaches, and others maintaining that comedy loses its edge when constrained by sensitivity concerns and that the show should continue as it always has. The production team's own perspectives are difficult to assess from outside, since creators rarely acknowledge quality decline in their own work. Seth MacFarlane has stepped back from day-to-day involvement to focus on other projects, though he continues voicing Peter, Brian, Stewie, and other characters, and his reduced involvement might contribute to changes in the show's voice and priorities, though the extent of his current creative input versus earlier seasons is not publicly detailed. The writing staff turnover over more than 20 years means contemporary Family Guy is written by substantially different people than the early seasons, new writers bringing different perspectives, references, and sensibilities that inevitably shift the show's character. And whether these shifts represent decline or simply evolution depends partly on whether viewers value consistency or freshness more. The animation has also evolved significantly, using digital techniques throughout production, and the visual polish of modern episodes is undeniable, with smooth movement, detailed backgrounds, and technical proficiency. Early seasons could not match, though some fans miss the slightly rougher aesthetic of earlier seasons, feeling the refinement has made the show look more generic. The voice performances remain professionally executed, but some fans detect a routine quality, actors delivering lines efficiently without the energy of earlier seasons, and whether that reflects actual change or projection from viewers overly familiar with the voices is difficult to determine objectively. Take a moment to subscribe if you are enjoying this breakdown. Reception patterns directly affect how Family Guy fits within contemporary adult animation, where the show's legacy and current output exist in a complicated relationship with each other and with newer competitors. Comparing Family Guy's golden age to its later seasons requires examining the specific elements fans and critics identify as having changed, understanding what made peak-era episodes distinctive, and recognizing how later seasons evolved those elements in ways many viewers found less satisfying. This is not simply about a subjective preference for older episodes driven by nostalgia, though nostalgia certainly plays a role. It involves identifying concrete differences in writing approach, comedic technique, character usage, and overall execution that distinguish the commonly identified Golden Age from what followed. The writing style in Golden Age Family Guy generally agreed to span from the revival in Season 4 through Season 7 or 8, demonstrated a particular balance between different comedy types. Episodes from this period mixed cutaways with character-driven comedy, satirical commentary with absurdist premises, and crude humor with occasional emotional depth. The joke density was high, creating the rapid-fire pace the show became known for, yet the jokes felt purposeful rather than random, serving narratives or character moments even when wildly tangential. By contrast, later seasons from roughly Season 10 onward showed shifts in that balance. Cutaway density stayed high or even increased, yet the cutaways increasingly felt formulaic or interchangeable. The character-driven comedy decreased as characters became more extreme caricatures, and the satirical edge dulled as the show relied more on references than on commentary about those references, creating episodes that structurally resembled earlier Family Guy while feeling qualitatively different in execution. Specific examples illustrate the differences. Road to Rupert from Season 5 featured Stewie and Brian traveling to Aspen to retrieve Stewie's teddy bear, balancing the adventure narrative with character development, showing Stewie's attachment to Rupert and his friendship with Brian, and the cutaways served the story or commented on the situations the characters faced, so the whole episode felt coherent even while incorporating the show's characteristic randomness. Compare that to a later episode with similar structure, which might include comparable numbers of jokes and cutaways, yet often shifted the balance toward cutaways existing purely for quick laughs without connecting to character or story. The adventure unfolding more mechanically and hitting expected beats without the character development that gave earlier episodes emotional anchoring, so the result looked like Family Guy in structure, while missing the elements that made Golden Age episodes satisfying beyond joke delivery. The pacing also differed in subtle but important ways. Peak-era episodes generally maintained narrative momentum even when interrupted by frequent cutaways, the main storyline advancing consistently with cutaways, feeling like detours that enhanced rather than derailed the progression, whereas later seasons sometimes felt like cutaways with minimal story connecting them, or like stories that stopped cold for cutaway sequences before resuming without smooth transitions. The internal rhythm of Golden Age episodes showed careful construction, with jokes building on each other and callbacks within episodes creating layered comedy. A joke early in an episode being referenced or expanded later for a satisfying payoff, while later seasons sometimes abandon this internal structure, with jokes existing independently rather than building cumulative momentum. The comedic risk-taking that characterized the Golden Age took specific forms. The show was willing to build elaborate set pieces, invest in extended parodies or homages, and commit to high-concept premises that required entire episodes to explore, and that ambition was matched by execution quality that justified the resource investment, whereas later seasons continued attempting ambitious episodes, but sometimes with less sharp execution or less fully developed concepts. The character voice writing in Golden Age episodes showed characters who were consistent enough to feel recognizable while still capable of development or surprise. Peter could be both bumbling fool and devoted father within a single episode without contradiction. Brian both intellectual snob and loyal friend. Stewie both diabolical genius and vulnerable child, whereas the later Flanderized versions lost that dimensionality and became less versatile for storytelling. The dialogue writing showed characters speaking in distinct voices that reflected their personalities while serving comedic purposes. Peter's dialogue sounding different from Brian's, which sounded different from Stewie's, creating verbal variety that enhanced characterization, while later seasons maintained the vocal distinctions in performance, yet sometimes wrote dialogue that felt less carefully differentiated, with characters becoming vehicles for jokes rather than distinct personalities with unique speech patterns. The pop culture reference strategy in the Golden Age involved transforming references rather than simply making them. When the show parodied a movie or referenced a phenomenon during the peak, it added its own perspective or twisted the reference to create new comedy beyond mere recognition, whereas later seasons increasingly deployed references as endpoints rather than starting points, assuming that mentioning something was itself funny without additional comedic work. The range of pop culture referenced also evolved. Golden Age episodes drew from diverse sources, including classic films, television history, literature, and contemporary culture, creating reference pools that rewarded different kinds of knowledge, while later seasons sometimes narrowed their range or relied more heavily on very recent pop culture, making episodes more immediately topical but dating them more quickly. The satirical targets in Golden Age episodes were often specific and clearly identified, whether mocking FCC censorship in PTV or commenting on American political culture. So the show had recognizable perspectives even when wrapped in absurdist presentation, whereas later season satire became less focused, sometimes making jokes about political or cultural topics without clear viewpoints beyond vague cynicism or both sides' dismissal. The political satire specifically evolved. Golden Age Family Guy generally leaned liberal while remaining willing to mock liberal positions and figures alongside conservative ones, a balance that created multi-directional, genuinely irreverent satire, while later seasons sometimes struggled to maintain it, with political content feeling either more partisan or more nihilistically dismissive of all political engagement. The emotional beats in Golden Age episodes, while never the primary focus, were earned through character development and narrative setup, so that when an episode ended with a genuine family moment or a bit of character growth, the audience had been given reason to care, whereas later seasons' attempts at emotion sometimes felt perfunctory or even ironic, as if the show were embarrassed by sincerity and needed to undercut any genuine feeling with additional jokes. The relationship between comedy and emotion in the Golden Age allowed for occasional moments where comedy paused to let real feeling register, rare enough to feel special and integrated smoothly enough not to disrupt the comedic tone, while later seasons either avoided these moments entirely or executed them with less grace, creating tonal whiplash between cynical comedy and sudden sentiment. The visual comedy in the Golden Age used animation creatively to enhance jokes that could not be achieved through dialogue alone, with sight gags, visual references, and animated set pieces demonstrating an understanding of animation as a unique medium, whereas later seasons remained technically proficient, yet often used animation less creatively, relying more on dialogue-driven humor than visual invention. The animation direction in Golden Age episodes showed attention to comedic timing and visual execution, with movements, expressions, and gags carefully timed for maximum impact, while the technically superior animation of later seasons sometimes felt less purposeful in its timing, with smoother movements that paradoxically felt less funny because they lacked the deliberate awkwardness or exaggeration that enhanced earlier visual comedy. The guest star usage in Golden Age episodes typically integrated celebrity voices into storylines organically, with guests playing characters that served the narrative rather than appearing just for the sake of celebrity cash, whereas later seasons continued featuring prominent guests, but sometimes in appearances that felt more like cameos, drawing attention to the guest rather than enhancing the episode. The frequency of guest appearances also increased, with multiple celebrities appearing in single episodes, where Golden Age episodes might have featured one major guest or none, potentially diluting the impact of any individual appearance while suggesting the show was relying on celebrity draws to maintain interest. The musical elements during the Golden Age were deployed strategically, songs appearing when they could enhance comedy or advance a story in ways dialogue could not, generally well-crafted and memorable, many becoming associated with the show in popular culture, whereas later seasons increased use of musical numbers while maintaining production quality, sometimes felt like formula rather than special moments, reducing impact through overuse. The variety of musical styles in Golden Age episodes showed creative range, from Broadway-style production numbers to parodies of specific artists to original comedic songs, while later seasons maintained variety. Yet the songs sometimes felt more generic or less specifically tailored to their episodes, serving as musical interludes rather than integral components of storytelling. The callback and continuity usage in Golden Age Family Guy created rewards for regular viewers without alienating casual ones, references to previous episodes, or running gags acknowledging the show's history while remaining accessible, whereas later seasons sometimes relied more heavily on continuity and callbacks in ways that privileged longtime viewers while potentially confusing newcomers. The episode structure in Golden Age seasons generally followed recognizable narrative arcs even when incorporating absurdist elements, with beginnings, middles, and ends that felt complete even when plots were deliberately ridiculous, whereas later seasons sometimes abandoned coherent structure entirely, creating episodes that felt fragmented or unresolved, as if the writers were less concerned with narrative satisfaction than with delivering individual jokes. The voice acting energy in Golden Age episodes is difficult to quantify, yet many fans report perceiving higher enthusiasm and commitment during peak seasons, and whether that reflects actual performance differences or is influenced by other factors like writing quality is uncertain, but the perception contributes to how episodes from different eras are experienced. The cultural relevance and impact of Golden Age Family Guy extended beyond the show itself, with episodes generating memes, quotable moments, and cultural discussions, whereas later seasons continue producing content. Yet individual episodes rarely achieve the same cultural penetration or lasting impact, which could reflect a changed media environment as much as changed quality, since the fragmented contemporary landscape makes cultural saturation harder for any content to achieve. Fan rankings and retrospective assessments consistently place Golden Age seasons higher, with seasons 4 through 7 typically appearing in or near the top tier, while season 10 and later appear significantly lower, a consistency across different platforms and communities that suggests genuine consensus rather than vocal minority opinion. The rewatchability factor distinguishes Golden Age episodes from many fans, as peak-era episodes are reportedly rewatched more frequently, shared more widely, and discussed more enthusiastically, and whether that reflects superior quality or simply the comfort of known quantities is debatable. But it demonstrates behavioral differences in how fans engage with different eras. The production context also differed, since peak-era Family Guy was produced by a team energized by the cancellation and revival, working to prove the revival justified, whereas later seasons are produced amid established success and assured renewal, which may reduce the creative urgency that can drive exceptional work, and the creative team's composition shifted significantly as writers, directors, and other key personnel moved on. Changes that inevitably affected the show's voice, even as some continuity remained through long-term staff like MacFarlane. A quick subscribe would be appreciated before we continue. This comparison helps define what Family Guy's golden age felt like to audiences, establishing the specific qualities that made those years feel special and explaining why they remain the reference point for evaluating the show's current output. The concept of a golden age for Family Guy represents more than nostalgic preference for earlier seasons or simple disagreement about comedy quality. Understanding why fans and critics identify a specific period as the show's peak reveals important insights about how humor evolves, how cultural context shapes reception, and how audience expectations change over time. The Golden Age perception matters because it reflects genuine patterns in how television comedy works, how long-running shows relate to their audiences, and how creative output is assessed across extended periods. The emotional connection many fans feel toward the early and peak seasons stems from the specific life circumstances in which they first encountered the show. For viewers who discovered Family Guy in high school or college, it became bound up with formative experiences, social bonding with friends, and the particular sensibility of that life stage. The humor that worked for them at 15 to 25 may not resonate the same way at 35 or 45, yet the earlier episodes remain tied to powerful memories from important developmental periods. That emotional anchoring means Golden Age episodes are remembered not just as television content, but as part of personal history. When longtime fans watch Season 5 episodes, they are not simply watching comedy from 2006 and 2007. They are accessing memories of where they were in life, who they watched with, what they were dealing with, and how the show fit into their routines, which makes it difficult to separate objective assessment from subjective response shaped by personal history. The power of these associations extends beyond individual viewing to encompass broader cultural moments. Fans remember not just the episodes, but the conversations they had about them, the quotes they shared, and the way certain episodes became reference points in their social circles. And this social embedding of Golden Age episodes in personal and communal memory creates layers of meaning that newer episodes, even if equally well crafted, cannot replicate because they lack the same historical and emotional weight. However, dismissing Golden Age perception as purely nostalgic overlooks the fact that the identified peak shows consistency across different viewer demographics and different points of entry. Fans who discovered the show through different means and at different times still tend to identify similar seasons as peak quality, suggesting that something beyond personal nostalgia contributes to the consensus. And this convergence across varied experiences points to qualities in the content itself rather than just individual viewer circumstances. The cross-generational consistency in identifying seasons 4 through 7 as the peak suggests those seasons possess objectively identifiable superior qualities, since different fans with different life experiences and cultural contexts arrive at similar conclusions, indicating that while nostalgia plays a role, it does not fully explain the pattern. The Golden Age concept also reflects how comedy ages and how comedic references and styles can become dated or feel less fresh over time. Family Guy's early seasons felt groundbreaking, partly because the cutaway structure and rapid-fire reference style were relatively novel in animated sitcoms, and as that approach became established and was copied by other shows, it lost some of its freshness. So the perception of a golden age partly reflects the reality that innovative comedy stops feeling innovative once it becomes familiar or widely imitated. The cultural context in which the show existed during its peak also shaped how it was received and remembered. The mid to late 2000s represented a specific moment in American culture, the television landscape, and the political environment, and a show that felt perfectly calibrated to that moment might naturally feel less aligned with different cultural contexts later. The political climate of the Golden Age years, spanning the later Bush administration and the beginning of the Obama presidency, created a specific context for the show's satire and social commentary, and its liberal-leaning yet omnidirectionally mocking approach resonated during this period in ways that might play differently in a changed environment, so that understanding Golden Age Family Guy requires understanding the cultural moment it was produced for and responded to. The media consumption patterns of the peak years also differed from contemporary habits in ways that affected how episodes were experienced. During the Golden Age, viewers typically watched episodes once a week as they aired, creating anticipation between episodes and allowing time for each to be discussed and absorbed before the next arrived, a pacing that produced different engagement than binge-watching entire seasons or streaming on demand. The weekly broadcast schedule also made each episode an event that viewers prepared for and discussed afterward with friends, co-workers, or online communities, creating shared cultural experiences where many people watched the same episode at the same time and then discussed it together, whereas contemporary fragmented viewing offers less opportunity for that collective experience. The appointment television aspect created ritualistic behavior around the show, with Sunday nights at 9 becoming Family Guy time for many fans, a routine and anticipation that made the show more than just content to consume and forged stronger bonds between show and audience than on-demand streaming typically allows. The relationship between the show and its audience during the Golden Age also involved a sense that the show was still proving itself and earning loyalty. After the cancellation and revival, it retained some underdog quality that made fans feel invested in its success, creating a partnership feeling where fans supported the show and the show rewarded that support with quality content. A dynamic later seasons lost by producing from a position of established success and guaranteed renewal, along with the creative energy that dynamic generated. The conversations about the Golden Age also reveal how fans engage with long-running franchises and construct narratives about creative rises and falls. The human tendency to organize experiences into stories with beginnings, middles, and ends encourages viewing the show's run as having distinct eras with peaks and valleys, a framework that helps make sense of hundreds of episodes across more than 20 years by dividing them into meaningful periods rather than treating them as undifferentiated content. That narrative structure serves psychological needs for order and meaning, since rather than confronting the overwhelming task of assessing hundreds of individual episodes, the Golden Age framework simplifies it into identifying a peak and comparing other periods to that standard, making the show's history more manageable and discussable. The Golden Age discourse also serves functions for fan communities beyond assessing quality, as debates about when the peak occurred and what defined it create opportunities to demonstrate knowledge, argue positions, share memories, and bond over common references, building community and shared language even amid disagreement. The existence of a perceived Golden Age also creates standards against which contemporary episodes can be measured, providing benchmarks for discussing what works or does not, so that rather than evaluating each new episode in isolation, fans can compare it to peak-era episodes to articulate specific successes or failures, making criticism more specific and constructive than simply saying something is not funny. The Golden Age perception also matters for understanding how creative longevity works in television and what challenges face any show trying to maintain quality across decades. Family Guy's arc from innovative newcomer to established institution to potentially declining legacy show represents a pattern many long-running series follow, and examining its trajectory provides lessons about creative sustainability, audience expectations, and the difficulty of maintaining freshness across hundreds of episodes. The pressure of living up to a perceived golden age affects the team producing contemporary Family Guy, whether they acknowledge it or not, since writers and producers know new episodes will be compared to peak-era classics and judged against high standards, which could inspire efforts to recapture past glory or create pressure that inhibits creativity and encourages playing it safe. The Golden Age concept also shapes how the show is marketed to new viewers, as streaming platforms and DVD releases highlight popular episodes and seasons, typically favoring Golden Age content, which reinforces the perception that certain seasons represent the definitive Family Guy experience, while implicitly acknowledging that later seasons may be less essential. Cultural studies and media analysis recognize Golden Ages as constructed narratives that serve ideological and social functions rather than objective truths about quality. And from this view, identifying a Family Guy Golden Age represents fans creating a usable past that validates their current positions about comedy, television, or culture. So the Golden Age becomes less about the actual shows and more about what they represent to people constructing narratives about cultural change. However, that theoretical perspective does not invalidate the genuine patterns fans identify, since a Golden Age can be both a constructed narrative and a reflection of real patterns in creative output and quality. Both things can be true at once. The generational aspect of Golden Age perception also matters, since older fans who watched from the beginning and younger fans who discovered the show later inevitably have different reference points, so that what feels like the definitive Family Guy experience varies based on when you started watching and what life stage you occupied during your most intense engagement. The Golden Age discourse also connects to broader conversations about whether comedy shows should end while still good or continue indefinitely, regardless of quality concerns. Family Guy's continued production, despite widespread perception of decline, raises questions about priorities, whether shows should prioritize artistic integrity and go out on high notes or continue as long as they remain commercially viable and provide employment, and the answer depends on whose perspective you privilege. From a business standpoint, continuing makes sense as long as the show generates profit and holds an audience. From a fan perspective focused on legacy, ending after the peak would preserve its reputation and prevent an accumulation of lesser episodes. From the perspective of people employed by the show, continuation provides livelihoods and creative opportunities regardless of critical reception. The Golden Age perception also influences how the show will be remembered once it ends, since the seasons identified as peak will likely dominate retrospectives, best-of compilations, and cultural memory, while later seasons may be forgotten or dismissed, a common pattern for long-running shows where cultural memory compresses the entire run into its highlight periods. The educational value of studying the Golden Age and perceived decline lies in what it teaches about comedy construction, audience relationship management, and creative sustainability. Lessons future shows and creators can draw on regarding what sustains quality over time, how to handle success, when experimentation helps versus hurts, and how to maintain creative energy across extended runs. Please subscribe before the final stretch if this has been worthwhile. This leads to a broader reflection on what Family Guy's complete arc teaches us about comedy evolution, creative longevity, and the complex relationships between shows and their audiences across time. Family Guy's complete journey, from its 1999 premiere through cancellation, revival, peak success, and perceived decline, provides a comprehensive case study in how adult animated comedy evolves, how audiences respond to long-running shows, and what factors contribute to creative sustainability. The commonly cited Golden Age, spanning roughly Season 4 through Season 7 or 8, represents a specific period when multiple factors aligned to produce what many consider the show's best work, and understanding this arc in full reveals important lessons about television comedy, creative processes, and the dynamics between shows and their audiences. The early seasons from 1999 through 2002 established the show's identity and its innovative approach to animated comedy. The cutaway structure, rapid-fire humor, willingness to push boundaries, and particular blend of crude and clever comedy distinguished it from competitors and built a passionate initial fan base, demonstrating that taking creative risks and doing something genuinely different could succeed even when initial ratings and critical reception were mixed. The lesson is that a distinctive voice and creative confidence can build audience investment even when a show struggles early. The willingness to be genuinely different rather than following established formulas proved essential to the show's initial success. It did not try to be The Simpsons or any other existing property, but developed its own identity through the cutaway structure and its particular sensibility, which teaches that innovation requires accepting the risk of alienating audiences accustomed to familiar approaches, while trusting that distinctive work will find its audience. The cancellation after Season 3 could have ended the story, but the show's afterlife in syndication and DVD sales demonstrated the value of content beyond initial broadcast. Family Guy found its audience through alternative distribution channels, proving that initial network performance does not tell the whole story of a show's viability or cultural impact, a lesson about long-tail success and multiple revenue streams that influenced how networks thought about programming and about giving shows time to find audiences. The syndication success showed that shows can build audiences over time through repeated exposure rather than requiring immediate massive viewership, as viewers who missed the original run or dismissed the show based on early episodes discovered it through Adult Swim reruns and became devoted fans, which teaches that quality can eventually find appreciation even when initial reception is lukewarm, provided alternative distribution allows second chances. The revival in 2005 represented an almost unprecedented second chance that energized the creative team and validated the fan base, and the post-revival seasons showed a team working with renewed purpose and enthusiasm, producing some of the show's most acclaimed episodes, which teaches that creative energy often peaks when teams feel they have something to prove, and when success feels earned rather than guaranteed. The hunger that comes from having faced cancellation and fought back generating exceptional work. The Golden Age period from roughly Season 4 through Season 7 demonstrated the show achieving the balance between its various elements that produced optimal results, with character-driven comedy mixed with cutaways, satire balancing crude humor, emotional moments enhancing rather than contradicting the comedy, and ambitious concepts executed with appropriate resources and care, which teaches that success in comedy television comes from balance rather than emphasizing any single element to the exclusion of others. The peak seasons also showed the value of confidence without complacency, the show being successful enough to secure resources for ambitious episodes like the Road to Specials and the Star Wars parodies, yet not so comfortable that it stopped taking risks. That sweet spot where confidence enables ambition, while pressure maintains creative discipline, appearing repeatedly in discussions of peak television. The resource investment in special episodes during the Golden Age demonstrated that networks and studios will support ambitious visions when shows have proven their value, since the elaborate road to episodes required significant additional budget and production time, yet Fox approved them because the show had demonstrated its commercial viability, which teaches that creative success can create opportunities for more ambitious work. The transition around Season 8 showed early signs of patterns that would grow more pronounced later. Mixed critical reception, some exceptional episodes alongside more mediocre ones, and subtle shifts in tone signaled that maintaining peak quality across extended runs is extremely difficult, teaching that even successful shows struggle to sustain their initial heights as they accumulate episodes and change creative teams. By season 10 and the years that followed, the perception of decline became widespread enough to represent general consensus rather than minority opinion, and its causes, including character flanderization, increased reliance on formula, decreased satirical sharpness, and loss of balance between comedy types, teach that long-running shows face specific risks, including character exaggeration, creative fatigue, loss of original personnel, and difficulty innovating within established formats. The flanderization that affected Family Guy demonstrates a common pitfall of long-running character-based shows, as writers seeking fresh angles on familiar characters can inadvertently exaggerate traits until characters become caricatures, and avoiding this requires conscious effort to maintain complexity and resist the temptation to simplify characters into their most extreme or easily writable traits. The continued commercial success despite perceived decline demonstrates the difference between critical or fan assessment and business viability, since the show remains profitable and draws adequate viewership to justify continuation, teaching that quality perception and commercial success do not perfectly correlate, and that a show can decline from its peak while remaining successful enough by business metrics to continue indefinitely. The experimentation of later seasons showed the team trying various approaches to maintain freshness and avoid stagnation, and the road to specials, anthology episodes, elaborate parodies, and structural experiments demonstrated a willingness to try new things even when results were mixed, teaching that experimentation is necessary for long-running shows even when not all experiments succeed, because pure formula eventually produces audience fatigue. The mixed response to many experimental episodes also teaches that innovation alone does not guarantee quality, that experimentation must be matched with execution and must serve the show's core strengths rather than distract from them. The most successful experiments, like Road to the Multiverse, working because they used experimental formats to enhance the existing comedic voice rather than replacing it. The character evolution across the run teaches lessons about the challenge of maintaining consistent characterization across hundreds of episodes, as the flanderization of most major characters demonstrates the difficulty of keeping characters fresh while preserving their core identities, since writers seeking new aspects to explore can drift toward exaggeration or changes that distance characters from their original conceptions, making the balance between consistency and development one of television's ongoing challenges. The relationship between the show and its audience evolved significantly, teaching how shows and fan bases interact over time, as the intense loyalty of early and peak-era fans gave way to more critical and divided contemporary audiences, demonstrating that audience relationships change as shows age and expectations evolve, and that maintaining positive relationships requires ongoing effort and attention to what fans value. The cultural impact of Family Guy extended beyond its viewership to influence the broader landscape of animated comedy, as shows like American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and various other adult animated comedies borrowed elements of its approach, teaching that successful innovation creates ripple effects across the medium, its influence on animation style, comedic pacing, and content boundaries shaping what came after, even as the show itself kept evolving. The critical discourse demonstrates how professional critics and fan critics can diverge in their assessments and priorities, since professional critics largely abandoned regular coverage after the early seasons, while fan communities maintained intense ongoing discussion, teaching that fan criticism and professional criticism serve different functions and operate by different standards, with neither necessarily more valid. The nostalgic attachment to Golden Age Family Guy teaches broader lessons about how memory and emotion affect media assessment, since the specific circumstances in which people encountered peak-era episodes shape how those episodes are remembered and valued, meaning objective quality assessment is always complicated by subjective response shaped by personal context. The business lessons include the value of syndication rights, the importance of DVD and streaming revenue, the power of dedicated fan bases, and the extended commercial viability of successful franchises, since the show's success across multiple platforms and revenue streams justified continued production and demonstrated sustainable business models that influenced industry practices. The creative sustainability lessons include the importance of maintaining core personnel, the challenges of staff turnover, the necessity of creative refreshment to avoid burnout, and the difficulty of maintaining quality across extended tenures, since the show's evolution demonstrates that even successful shows struggle with these challenges, and that perfect creative sustainability may be impossible across decades. The cultural context lessons include how changing social values affect comedy reception, how sensitivities around offensive content evolve, and how comedy that felt transgressive in one era can feel dated or inappropriate in another, since the show's willingness to push boundaries played differently in 1999, 2007, and 2020, teaching that comedy exists in specific cultural moments that shape how it is received. The legacy lessons involve how long-running shows will be remembered and how later seasons affect overall reputation, since Family Guy's legacy will likely rest primarily on its innovations, its peak-era episodes, and its influence on animated comedy rather than on its complete body of work, teaching that accumulating large numbers of episodes does not necessarily enhance legacy if later episodes are perceived as inferior. The practical lessons for creators include the value of a distinctive voice, the importance of balancing different comedy elements, the necessity of creative confidence matched with execution quality, the challenges of maintaining freshness across extended runs, and the reality that even successful shows face decline from peak performance, lessons that apply well beyond Family Guy. The audience expectation lessons include how familiarity breeds both affection and potential contempt, how audiences develop sophisticated critical frameworks for shows they follow across years, and how nostalgia and personal history complicate quality assessment, understanding of which helps creators and critics appreciate the complex relationships between shows and audiences. The comparative lessons involve how the show's arc parallels other long-running animated comedies, since The Simpsons faced similar decline narratives. Despite maintaining cultural presence, South Park evolved its approach significantly while maintaining quality in many viewers' estimation, and Bob's Burgers and newer shows benefit from observing these predecessors, each trajectory teaching different lessons about creative sustainability and audience management. Family Guy's influence remains significant regardless of debates about when its golden age ended. Its innovations in animated comedy structure, its cultural impact during the peak years, and its continued presence make it an important case study, and the commonly cited peak of seasons 4 through 7 represents a specific creative accomplishment that stands independent of what came before or after. Understanding the show's complete arc, from innovative newcomer through peak success to perceived decline, provides insights valuable to anyone interested in television comedy, creative processes, or media analysis, since the patterns observed in its evolution appear across other long-running shows, suggesting general principles about how serialized comedy works and how creative output changes over extended periods. The story told by the show's perceived peak and decline is ultimately about the realities of creative work across time, the difficulty of sustaining excellence, and the complex relationships between creators, content, and audiences. Lessons that reach beyond a single animated sitcom to illuminate broader truths about art, commerce, and the human need for stories that make us laugh. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.